Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School.
This week we're going to continue our No Capes Festival with 2007's Persepolis.
Let's dive on in. All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher.
And if you like what you see /here, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people, what, Adam?
Where they find good media is my guess.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. And for our second installment...
Not great media, just good.
No, good. It's middle of the road media. That's the tagline on our bumper sticker. Deep Dive Film School. For middle-of-the-road content. So this is a second installment of our No Capes Festival. Mm-hmm. This is one that you definitely wanted to do when we kind of had a bigger list and we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Tell me why this movie sticks with you, because I know we talked about it years and years ago.
Honestly, this movie was a little different than I remembered it, I think, in my brain. I think the thing that stuck with me the most is this just amazing hand-drawn animation and the look and feel of the movie. This movie was way more serious than I remembered it being.
Yeah, those comedic moments are sort of what stick out. They're also what show up the most in the trailer.
Yes.
So I think that's probably why. It's a little girl and she loves punk music and Bruce Lee and that's what sticks with you.
That's such a small part of the story. And nostalgically, I remember the whole rebellious anarchist thing. Loving that part and thinking it was fun to see this kind of coming of age story of this girl who grows up in Iran during basically the Islamic Revolution.
Yeah.
And, what that means, how she views the world. And that's not to say I didn't like this movie by any means. It's based off a graphic novel of her life story.
Marjane
Satrapi.
Yeah, Satrapi.
And she, is obviously the main character here, voiced by Chiara Mastroianni, and then Catherine Deneuve, which everyone knows. So this time around, I actually watched the English version.
I was wondering about this.
Because I've seen the French version a few times, and it's amazing, and I think you should always see a movie in the native tongue that it was made.
Yeah.
But
with animation, that can be a little bit different.
It is a little different,
yeah.
And more these days, they're doing multiple versions, and the dad in the version that I watched was Sean Penn.
Wow.
And it was really interesting to watch this movie, probably for the third or fourth time, and thinking about how different that kind of made it to a degree, because in the funny parts, the accents and just kind of like how they were presented seemed a little more jokey and silly to a degree, where this is a pretty fucking dark movie.
It's a very dark movie.
And there still is very dark moments, no doubt. And I'm not complaining about that at all, but it was just kind of a different perspective I'd seen. And I do like when I don't think anything necessarily gets taken away by, especially as long as it's not an overdub, right? That's what we're talking about. That's kind of like the classic, what you're thinking of, like, oh yeah, the English version I see.
Yeah,
just some random guy that thinks he sounds like you're talking about Rambo. First Blood Part 2.
Turkish Rambo, yeah.
It's like the guy who talked like Cy Sloan. Hey, come on here, guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little different.
But this, this is Sean Penn, a trained actor, and so you can really envelop in the characters a little bit more. But no, I mostly for me the animation was what stood out and what I always remember, because it's so distinctive and beautiful, and they have this it gets really cartoony sometimes, but they also have this when basically everything except for present day is black and white, and you get these silhouettes of the flashbacks throughout the movie, and holy shit, there's some captivating, beautiful stuff there.
You're absolutely right that a huge part of this is the animation. And you think of other movies that have done something similar, at least in tone and style. I'm thinking of Waltz with Bashir.
Yeah, no, I definitely thought of Waltz with Bashir.
And while the animation there is amazing, or something like The Tower, the animation is amazing. That's a little
different, yeah.
It's more that they're using it as a vehicle for a thing. And obviously there are still fantastic artists involved in that. There's fantastic art direction and vision in that. I think what makes this so specific is that it really is this woman's story, and that the illustrations are by this woman. That what we're seeing in the animation here is a filmic representation of the drawings that she made of the people in her life that she loved. And that's what this story is. So that grandmother...
And that's the history of kind of why she made
the
graphic novel to begin with.
Yeah.
So she drew this... I didn't realize
it's all her. It's all her. Yeah. So
she's an amazing person.
She's an incredible person.
And you could see that from her upbringing and kind of why and how she got, but also the times where we're going through the ups and downs, like when she's in Vienna and stuff like that. You can see why she became the person she became. And at certain points, you're like, fuck, this is... rough.
Yeah, everything from like homelessness to like rape to suicide attempts to the death of friends. All of it is drawn really through her eyes. I mean, this exists so closely to the graphic novel that they're really companion pieces. I mean, this is a autobiographical story that this woman drew and created to talk about the things that she'd been through in her life.
No doubt. I think, we pretty much, I guess we start with her in the airport, but it's really more about the flashbacks, right? Is what
that's the main story.
And he does the thing which I know you love, that Wes Anderson does in Grand Budapest Hotel, where there's a flashback inside of a flashback.
A story nestled in a story nestled in a story. I love that stuff.
And that's all.
It's like 10,000 Arabian Nights. Like it's so like classic literature.
And that's all what they do here, because they start around 1978 or something like that in Tehran, which a lot of this is just like painfully relevant
today.
Right,
I mean, we're talking about about
September 2020 and
2021.
Sorry. I know what year it is. And Persepolis means Persian city.
Yeah.
And we get this whole coming of age story of her going through this and seeing people that she loves and her parents who are these bleeding hearts that are just awesome people, and really care about her, but understand like living in a war-torn country is not easy for a child. And at some point send her away, but half of this movie is her trying to understand the family history of what she has here, and seeing a few of these different uncles. I guess it's one main uncle who goes to the jail, and that really ends up being kind of her hero.
He is this talisman. He is this character that represents integrity, that represents actually sacrificing yourself for the greater good. And like, you think about it and you go, boy, most of us, like, I'm so glad this story is told, not just for our own personal experience, but also just to be like, all right, so it's not just fiction. There are human beings out there like that. Because most of us don't, like, we have heroes in our lives, or we have people that we look up to. The fact that there is a character of Uncle Anush, like that character existed in real life, is like, it's a heartwarming thing to be like, oh, this is like her autobiographical story about this, and these people that in her life.
She doesn't necessarily emotionally deal with it, at least in the movie.
Well, don't you think that and this is an element that I think I forgot about because there's so much happening in this movie, but we talked a lot about how the part that sticks with you the first time you watch it is her rebellious streak, the fact that she writes "Punk's Not Dead" on her jacket, right? And then she gets sent off to Vienna, and then like meets up with all these like hardcore punk kids, and they go out to these shows and all this stuff. And it really is living through the typical teenager like rebellion thing of like, oh, nothing matters, right? I'm a nihilist or whatever.
You can see that in her character though way earlier on.
Oh yeah, like when she's like 10 years old with like the Bruce Lee stuff.
She wants, not even that, but like just going to get bullets to throw at someone, because they're pissed about them, and she like finds out that her grandpa was a communist, and so
communist,
but she didn't, she spelled it differently and didn't pronounce it correctly, and
right?
Just like you could see that a little bit of the anarchist side there, and you can definitely hear it in the narration of like how pissed and how she's not taking people's shit to a degree, and like she's like, fuck that person, no, fuck them. Like she knows that what she wants and knows what's right and knows what's wrong, and I think she wouldn't have had that if she didn't have the family history that she does, or the upbringing that she does. So it was easier for her to fall into with those punk anarchists in Vienna.
Totally. But then the really interesting thing that happens is that all of, like, in a grand scheme, all of them are posers. I mean, compared to her, all of us are posers.
Yeah, like you lived in a war and a revolution?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like any of us who thought like we got into like edgy music and we're like, here, let me tell you how it is, man.
Yeah.
Which is what every young person does. And that's the thing that was the hardest for her growing up is that she's like, and she talks about this. She's like, I'm so angry and I have no idea where to put it or what to do with it. Right. And this is, and what's interesting is, although
that's something that people in their early 20s can relate to.
Oh my God, all the time. The only difference is most of us haven't actually left a real war zone, right? And so like the whole thing is theatrics. The whole thing is just theater. Whereas for her, what's interesting is other than a couple of moments where she's doing like cartoon doodles, this is not a story about her realizing how to be an artist.
Yeah, it could be easily. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about that is that learning how to be an artist, learning how to express ourselves artistically, whether, with me it's drawing, with you it's film, like we all found, music, all these things, like we found these things. But without it, that moment where she's very suicidal and she's saying, I don't know what to do with this feeling inside of me, right? And so instead, like, I almost feel like I need to be gone because it's the only way I'll be able to accurately deal with it. And you go, that's the perfect moment to introduce and then I picked up a pencil and I learned how to draw.
That's a good point.
But this movie
doesn't do it.
Doesn't do that.
What happens is like she gets racked with guilt because her parents sent her away and they're living in a war-torn country.
Exactly.
And so that's really interesting. And like just hearing the stories of her uncle has a profound effect on her, right? Like that's really big. She shares them with her friends, even though they're out of context probably to a degree. And, she's kind of grabbing for kind of what she can as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I really think the way they deal with religion here is really interesting because she has these conversations with God and he's like, well, why is such a future prophet, acting this way?
Yeah. And then also at one point,
she screams, "Go away, God!"
Well, and isn't Stalin shows up or right. It's just like all of those moments are so
But when
good.
she's pissed and can't understand what's happening in the world, she screams, "Go away, God!" And I've never heard anyone say it quite like that before. If you know what I mean, like people can change their views on religion and question God all the time, but the literal screaming of like "fuck you, go away, God!"
Oh, it's amazing.
Wow, pretty powerful and like surprising to see, especially in obviously a very religious heavy country and upbringing.
Oh, totally. Well, and it's
maybe
like
not her upbringing,
none of that connects with her, and so we see the world through her eyes becoming more and more radicalized in Tehran, and it is so frustrating. I'm reminded of I started rewatching Chernobyl because it's so good. But there's that moment where the one female scientist is like doing this research, and she tries to take it to her superior, and he's this schlubby guy behind the desk, and he's like, well, I don't believe you. I don't think that what this evidence you're showing me is right. And she's like, mm-hmm. And he's like, I know what you're thinking. A year before the revolution, I was a shoe salesman, and now I'm your boss, even though like you're a college educated scientist. And he's like, isn't that funny? And he like just basically throws it in her face. He's like, I don't believe you, and I don't have to know anything to not believe you. I'm just your boss.
I'm in power.
I'm in power. Even though literally he had been a shoe salesman the year before.
Sure, I mean,
that frustration of these revolutionary changes that take place, it's like you see that so well here, where it's like she is just trying to like just all these infuriating conversations around like
the disrespect.
Oh, well, here's how women should be. You know, fix your scarf. Yeah. Like, you know, don't run when you're going down the street. I know you're trying to get to the bus. I can see
your hair, but like, let's fix that.
Or like it makes your buttocks move in a provocative way. And at that point, she's had too much. And she's like, then stop looking at my ass.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like she's able, even though to her detriment and to her danger, her physical danger,
sure,
she is still speaking up these things. And it feels so frustrating because you're just like I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine living in a world
and
like
I think
that.
It's really, you know, she witnesses it with her mom and her mom having to put up with it. But I think it's really great to be able to get that honest perspective, not only just from a woman, because, you know, women, although differently in different ways, get disrespected in America all the time.
Right.
An Iranian woman's honest perspective of what it's like to go through something like that.
mean,
I'm with you. I can't imagine.
In a Middle Eastern fundamentalist society, like, it's terrifying. And that's not even taking into account what's happening in Texas right now. But my God, it's like they got caught, you know, I'm skipping forward, but she gets caught holding hands with her boyfriend. So they end up getting married. Yeah. They end up getting married just to like, all right, well, at least this way now we can hold hands. They weren't even walking
on the street. It wasn't even PDA. They were in a car. They just drove by and she was with someone and like
holding their hand,
slightly flirting.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty like disturbing, no doubt, and it continues to be to this day. Let's talk about some of the parts that I guess probably stuck with us more a little bit, kind of the funnier parts. I love when she goes and is trying to, and these guys are selling like cassette tapes, like drug dealers. Like, hey, I got some Iron Maiden here.
Yeah,
got some ABBA.
Yeah, ABBA. Is it ABBA?
Funny enough, Iron Maiden is perfect, and I love that that's what she chose because it kind of captures the chaos, especially the song that they chose to put in the movie. Oh,
completely.
It's really fun, but just having that like kind of poking fun at the harshness, because she does go to this conservative school in the early 80s and she gets into pop culture and music and boys, and the world is obviously changing around her, but she's still trying to be a teenager as much as she can. And
as difficult as that could possibly be.
No doubt. And as difficult as it was for her to leave to Vienna, I still think it was very necessary, and I don't think she would be the person she is today if she didn't have the opportunity to do that.
So let's talk a little bit about one of her biggest influences, which is her grandmother.
Oh, she's the best
such
character.
A fantastic
best
character
in the movie.
Oh, easily. Just so funny. And again, the way that she draws her with just like those almond eyes and just
she puts flowers in her bra.
She puts flowers in her bra.
She smells good every day.
Yeah,
that's
and she
actually kind of genius.
It is. And then she like, why, Grandma, why are your breasts so firm? And she's like, I soak each one in a cup of ice water for 10 minutes every morning.
So her boobs are very important. Too.
Yes, but it's just it's such it's such, I don't know, like insider knowledge of one young woman to an older woman relative.
Yeah.
Like it feels so intimate in that way of just like,
well, and having that connection, like her parents are great and they never really fight or anything. Like they're awesome people, but like she's really connected to her grandma. There's something special there.
Much more. Well, and her grandmother, again, almost seems to be the one that's holding all this sacred knowledge from only the perspective that a woman can in this kind of a society where she can tell the stories about grandpa and she can tell the stories about uncle, right? And she's the keeper of all these stories. And that comes up as being very important later on. As she gets older, is that her grandmother is the one that's coming back as the temperature check to say, you're selling yourself out. Like, what about integrity? This is always the thing I've talked about.
Definitely.
You know?
Yeah, they talk about integrity a lot.
And it's a very important, you know, and there's...
It's hard to have that self-respect sometimes, right? Like, to think about that and think about other people. Like, it's just not... I don't know. It's just not easy sometimes, especially for someone in that kind of situation. And it's easy, I guess, to let go and forget about it, right? And ease up.
And she tries to. When she goes to Vienna, she tells the first boy that she flirts with.
She falls in love.
And she says that she's French, right? And she will not admit that she's from Iran. And because she's embarrassed by it, because she doesn't want to be treated that way. And the fact that becomes such a point of contention between her and her grandmother of like, you need to be proud of this. Like, I realize that you're from a country where there's all this crazy shit going on. And that is an identity crisis that God, when I was watching it, I was like, I couldn't even imagine. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I travel abroad. I'm not wearing a sticker on my shirt that's like, I'm an American, because we have a lot of shit to not feel great about. But that compared to in the 1980s, just wanting to be from anywhere else that wasn't going through something that I bet as a teenager probably doesn't even feel like terrifying or like earth-shattering, but embarrassing, right? It's like one of your parents embarrassing you. You're like, oh, I don't live at that house over there where they haven't mowed the lawn in 5 years, right? Like, you would lie. And that's her version of it as a teenager is not, oh, I'm from this country where all this crazy shit's happening. Instead, it's like, oh, Iran? No, I've never been there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The Vienna part of the movie, I think, is super important because it's really her biggest down, I think, part. But also at the same time, she falls in love. Even though one of them's gay. One of them cheats on her. Her re-flashback of the shitty version of that guy is the best part of the movie.
With his big buck teeth and just like, amazing.
So good. Might be my favorite part of the movie, but super hilarious. But in an otherwise pretty dark and bleak movie.
Exactly.
Where she does become basically homeless, like you were saying earlier. And she comes to a realization. I love that you pointed out, not leaning on becoming an artist, because I didn't even realize that she drew all of this stuff. I figured she had a say in like what the graphic novel looked like, but maybe not the movie. So that's amazing that she went on and was able to be such an artist that way, because they easily a lesser movie would have fallen towards that and saying, this is what inspired me to be what you're seeing today.
Of course.
And no, it's all personal. It's all political to a degree, and putting up with an amount of shit. But she eventually moves back to Iran because she's in this low place, and has to readjust, and life changes again for her.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the artwork here. Something that's really interesting is the film was produced by a total of 20 artists, and initially they were opposed to making this an animated movie. And the idea was to make it into something that was more a live action style movie. And one of the things one of the producers said was, I know the new generation of French comic book artists quite well, and I'm afraid of Marjane. Like, he's like, she's intimidating. So the last thing that I wanted to do was to be like, let's take your graphic novel and make it into a cartoon. Like, he was like, I don't want to do that.
That's funny.
But what they ended up doing, and I think this is all right. We want to talk about some deep dive. May I put on my bullshit professor bullshit hat?
Please do.
Okay, so what they decided was the idea that depicting the novel Persepolis with live action, it would have turned into a story of people living in a distant land who don't look like us. That's what she said, right? So Satrapi said, at best, it would have been an exotic story, and at worst, a third world story.
Sure.
That leads me to anybody who is a comic book nerd probably knows who Scott McCloud is. Scott McCloud basically wrote the book. You can take college courses on comic book artistry. And Scott McCloud literally wrote the book on it. It is the textbook, is this book that's about why comic art is important and why it's important as its own medium. One of the things he describes in it is the avatar, the character, right? If you were to make a comic book where the panels in it were photographs of real actors, and they had word bubbles above them, you'd be able to sort of identify, but then you're basically just watching a frozen film, right? It's not the same thing that a graphic novel brings to the table.
Yeah.
So,
just the nature of animation is going to allow you to do things that you just couldn't.
But even panel to panel, then you get even more into like what makes a comic book special.
So you're talking about the graphic novel.
The graphic novel itself. So the way that McCloud describes it is, if you have a photograph of a person, it represents one person. If you then take it and sketch it out and do an artist representation of the photograph, now it's maybe 5 different people that could identify with that because it's a drawing. If you simplify it more, now there's 50 that it could identify with it. The more and more simple you go along the line of drawing that character, the more people can identify with and empathize with it. So if you...
Whether they're from Iran or not.
No matter where they're from.
Yep.
So once you have these simplistic, beautifully expressive drawings that she's made, they represent all of us. All of us can put ourselves into these characters.
And that's why it's mainly black and white.
And that's why it's mainly line drawings.
Yeah.
They're not super detailed.
No.
So that is the magic and the true essence of why graphic novels and comic books and those simplistic drawings are so important to us and why they resonate with us as an audience member.
Yeah.
So the fact that they animated her actual drawings and that her concern was literally what McCloud is talking about. It would seem like a third world country. It would seem like it was happening to somebody else instead of it happening to us. The cartoon version of it means that we're able to connect with this no matter who they are. We're like, this is so unfair these people are living under this regime.
Interesting.
Because they look like us. We think they're us.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of a magical little bit?
I mean, that's true, though, completely. Like, I can completely see that. Yeah, I mean, if she was a dark-skinned,
actress, and we're seeing an actual person portraying her, we're like, oh, things were so hard for them. Like, it would literally be like watching Under the Shadow, where I would be so terrified. Oh, totally. And you're like, I would be terrified to live in that kind of a world. And you're like, but once it's this cartoon line drawing, we're like, that is so fucked up that she has to deal with that.
Yeah.
Because we no longer are imagining it taking place in the 80s. It taking place in Tehran.
I think that was there subconsciously, probably, but it's totally true.
Yeah.
It's 100% true.
Yeah.
Like, I mean...
It's a fun magic trick.
But the fact that the simpler it is, the more relatable it is. I mean, you look at something like The Simpsons, that is not complicated drawing, right?
Dude, Charlie Brown. Yeah. How many of us, when we look at Charlie Brown, see ourselves in him? Because he's a circle with a couple of squiggles on him. And so we're all like, oh, God, yeah, people have tried to get me to kick the football and then took it away.
They do an amazing job of their own version within the animation, of pop culture within, like, their world, right? So they stick to their style of animation. Like, at some point, I think her husband is watching the Terminator, like Terminator 2, but it's their version
of it. Or like the hardcore punk bands where he's just like, rah! And screaming into the mic. You're like, yes, it all still looks, all of the artwork still totally fits within the world.
Which is a hard feat, and honestly, it blows me away that she drew this too. Like, wow. Like, that just makes this movie that much better.
Yeah.
I have to say, once she gets back to Iran the second time, she has a lot of weird pressure on her through this movie, and she gets genuinely depressed. I think they even diagnose her with depression at some point. And, she gets the Eye of the Tiger going and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And starts kind of becoming a little more defiant to the point, where it's like the early 90s now, and they talk about how the grand phase of the grand ideas phase is over, right? We just want to get by now. Like, we're tired of thinking about like what's going to fix the world.
Yep.
We just want to like live our lives.
Right,
like,
because you would become exhausted
let's
by
put
that.
the war behind us kind of thing. And it's really fascinating. Now, there is this one line that I have to get to that her, I believe it's her uncle and her uncle and her mom talk about. And this is after the elections, and this is just, tell me if this sounds familiar at all. He says, revolutions go through periods of transition. Half the country is illiterate. Nationalism and religious fervor is the only thing that brings people together in a time like this.
Oh, God.
And I was just like, holy shit, is that on the nose like I've ever seen before? And,
it scares the shit out of me, dude.
And just having that perspective and the fact that, this happened back in the 80s, back in the 70s, of what we're talking about, and that still applies.
The fact that one of her friends dies because they were having a house party, and that these guys are being chased across this rooftop.
They're hiding booze. They're forging documents.
And you're just like, what the hell, man? Like,
it's next level.
It really is. And again, I think that this universality to the animation, again, to go to something like Waltz with Bashir, them listening to Enola Gay while they're on the boat, and like the way the animation looks, you're like, this happened yesterday. And what it does is it means that when you come face to face with these atrocities, you don't have to do a lot to make it feel anachronistic, to make it feel like we're moving through time and space, because instead those line drawings are universal and they're timeless, right? And so if they had done anything else other than this black and white style, if they had done anything else other than it seeming, I don't think all of it's traditional animation. I think a lot of it is helped through, CGI technology to be able to make it. It's a hand-drawn cell animation. But it's a hand-drawn cell animation that probably has some computer help with a lot of the sort of heavy lifting. But the look of it and the feel of it feels timeless in those same ways. So it makes it universal to us, which makes her story of both herself and her family's sacrifice feel so potent and timely in just like the most important way.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this movie humbles people when they watch it.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't say anything better about it than that.
So
yeah,
it is. And the last thing I'll say is when she has to say goodbye again.
I know.
Really hard this time. Like, she said goodbye before, and it was obviously hard. But this time, where it's the last time she sees her grandma, and she remembers her. But like, I totally teared up at this moment where it's like she understands a lot more of the world now. Yep. And it's a lot harder saying goodbye this time.
Well, because there's probably this feeling, and it makes me think of something like The Farewell, where it's like, when I say goodbye to you now, it's goodbye. It's not, I might have the chance to come back. This is, there probably isn't, an Iran that I can actually come back to. So I'm never going to see you again. And like, that is,
to one of your kids or whatever, like that's,
woof.
Again,
it's like so big.
Hard to grasp the emotional weight of something like that. And that's why it's so important to recognize what other people go through.
Well, that's just it, man. I feel like that, in the work that I do with young people and things like that, like the thing that's most important to me is that the biggest version of rebellion that I can be a part of is to pass on empathy.
Yeah. Empathy is huge.
And empathy is fostered through hearing other people's stories. And so, like with Persepolis, like knowing her story and thinking of her as like another human being, another kid who went through their own like awkward rebellious phase and got into like punk music and but we're literally going through like the things that we usually just see in National Geographic pictures of a country that our country went and fucking carpet bombed, right? And there's just some picture of like a kid crying in a street, and it's like, but what if we could watch like 15 years of that kid's life and see shit through their eyes? That's how you foster empathy, and that's literally, in my opinion as an artist, the biggest revolutionary thing that you can do is to get somebody else to be like, oh, they're a human being. And you're like, yeah, you fucking idiot. You should have realized it a long time ago, but at least now you did. And I got to help with that, right? And like, that's the most important thing that you could do.
I love that concept, and I love what you're saying there. Listening to other people's stories is how you become empathetic. Wow, I love that. I'm gonna. That's a life rule.
That's right? That's it. It
truly
man.
should be for everyone out there. Take a little time and consider other people's situations, and it's not that hard to find empathy. It really isn't. So, amazing movie. Again, different than when I planned on. When I turned it on, I was like, "Hey, family, come hang out
like,
and watch this cool animated movie."
A lot of people die in this animated movie. I forgot it was about Iran.
Yeah,
in the 80s.
Yeah, and again, I remembered it just being funnier and whatever. But like, Still brilliant movie.
Yeah.
You can definitely see the influence of the graphic novel here for sure.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, anyways. Well, let's continue this No Capes Fest. We're gonna do
I think
My
next
Friend Dahmer or Scott Pilgrim.
let's do My Friend Dahmer.
Okay.
It's a little darker. It's kind of the dark horse in this festival, but and then we'll end on the fun, ridiculous high note that is Scott Pilgrim.
We've never really talked that much
We've
about
never
Scott
talked
Pilgrim
about
either.
this movie, I feel like. But before that, next week we do have a great That One scene from The Princess Bride.
Yes.
Come on, guys. You know what it's going to be. Hello! Anyway, that's next week. For this week, I'm Adam Sherlock.
I'm Adam Palcher. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, you guys.